Good evening. Tonight I want to talk to you about investigative journalism. Many in America believe that investigative journalism is dying. That simply isn't the truth. Many believe that investigative journalism has been killed by the internet, or most correctly, social media. And all in all, that is simply not correct. Investigative journalism's old home of newspapers is what's suffering the slow death. Investigative journalism's old home newspapers relied upon two revenue streams. One that most of us all know about is advertising. Advertising dollars that was sold to the advertiser as stick it in the paper and they will read it. But that old adage simply doesn't work anymore. Facebook and Google are the new platforms, utilizing their specific advertising algorithm to reach all of us throughout the world. And what does that mean? Mark Ingram of the Columbia Journalism Review states that Facebook and Google absorb 85% of all advertising dollars on the internet. Let me repeat that. 85% of all advertising dollars is gone through two corporations. That leaves very little for the rest of the world. The second form of advertising dollars, or some would call advertising dollars, is classified ads, where your grandfather or your father would post something for sale, a garage sale, and that was the secret source of revenue to newspapers. You would write in a little article and send it into the newspaper and pay for X number of days, and you would pray and hope that the newspaper published that correctly. But a man from the city of San Francisco by the name of Craig created a list that completely destroyed that for newspapers. Craig's list provided the user to be the publisher and state exactly what they wanted with no word count and post pictures for absolutely no cost. This was a devastating blow that newspapers are still suffering from today. But what does that mean for investigative journalism? It takes months and years to properly investigate something. And what does that require? Money to pay for the resources and the manpower to execute that. But what did social media do for investigative journalism and journalism as a whole? It made it transparent. Mark Harvard of the IRE Journal and Bill Connolly of Forbes both stated that Twitter removed the curtain. Like the curtain that blocked Oz from Dorothy, it was now open. We could directly tweet to the journalists that were out there. No longer were they hidden faces on a page. But what did that ultimately do? It made a direct connection to the journalists. There was no more need for a middleman, and that middleman's name was the newspaper. Mark Hovitt also maintained that Americans aren't tired of reading long articles. We're not set to 180 characters of the pictures on Instagram. We actually love long articles more today than our grandparents did of 50 years ago. But what do we like reading? We like reading things that interest us, like sports or music or something in between like crafts. But social media moves at a much quicker pace. Here in South Dakota, specifically in Sioux Falls, we have Argus 911, which can post something that happened 5 minutes from now instantaneously. But it's after 9 o'clock at night. What does that mean for a newspaper like the Argus Leader? That means that story may not make the night cut. That could mean 2 days from now I'm reading about something that I read about on Twitter tonight. Matthew Ingram also stated in the Columbia Journalism Review that newspapers moved like dinosaurs. They looked at the internet and social media like they did news as radio and as television of the past. They looked at them as just small hurdles that they would overcome. But what they didn't realize is radio and television both require dollars to advertise on there. Where the internet, with advertising, a much more efficient and cost-effective way to reach the target core audience, and Craigslist completely eliminated classified. So by that time, it was too late for newspapers. They were posting their articles on Facebook and Twitter and even Instagram. So what does that mean for investigative journalism? It's not dead. It just simply is transformed. Colin Birchers of the Washington Post, a newspaper, even stated they're transitioning from newspapers to more contemporary media. So, shows like HBO's Vice or your nightly news on ABC, CBS, NBC, that is your more contemporary format for investigative journalism. But for the millennials, there's websites like the Daily Beast or even the Onion, which is more of a comedic piece. But it's like the Daily Show. Millennials gravitate towards those for their daily consumption of news. And what did Twitter provide? Twitter provides a sneak peek of the article. I don't need to read the whole article to get a gist of it. I can read a snippet from one of my favorite journalists and realize, hey, I may or may not like this. If I like it, it's clickbait, and I go to that article. So what have we seen in the past week? We have seen 2 fantastic investigative journalism pieces come out. Jeff Maish of the Daily Beast wrote an amazing article about the ex-cop who stole millions of dollars from McDonald's Monopoly game. It's a fascinating piece, and he did it from the internet. Brett McMurphy, a fired and disgraced employee from ESPN, who raised Cain because it costs too much to have investigative journalism there, on his own Facebook page brought down Urban Meyer from Ohio State for him covering up abuse from one of his assistant coaches, from his own personal Facebook page, not Washington Post, not the LA Times, not the New York Times. So what does this say? Newspapers are slowly dying a death. But investigative journalism, just like a caterpillar, is turning into a butterfly. And it will soar into the wind and be just as fine as it was 100 years ago. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening.